All right, today we're going to talk about sampling methods. As you remember last class, we talked about biases. And sampling methods are a way of avoiding bias, right? They're a phenomenal way of ensuring that we don't have any bias in an experiment. And biases can skew our data. They can make it so that whatever it is we're measuring doesn't actually prove to have an accurate result. We're going to learn about 5 different sampling methods today. So the first one I want you to know is known as simple random sampling. And simple random sampling is kind of like it says, a very simple thing. It works for small populations. Why, you might wonder, well, the situation with simple random sampling is there's really no sorting, right? The situation with it is we're just looking at completely random, objectively random facts of distributing people. So we mix people around, and we give them an equally likely chance to get measured or surveyed or whatever have you. The problem here is we don't have categories. And the problem with that is categories allow us to understand our data more thoroughly, as we all know. Categories like gender, socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, things like this allow us to better understand where our data is coming from and what it truly means. So that's why sampling is the least likely one for you to use of the various sampling methods. Now, the second sampling method that you're going to have an opportunity to work with is known as stratified random sampling. And stratified random sampling is much more commonly used. Okay? This one's very useful. This is where you first sort your participants, your population, into groups based, of course, on categories. And those categories are things like we mentioned a second ago. Things like socioeconomic status, right? Things like gender. Things like race or ethnicity, if those end up being useful for your study. And so basically you sort your population into these groups, and then you randomly sample them from there. Okay? Now, the third type of sampling method that we're going to look at is known as cluster random sampling. Now, cluster random sampling is very similar to stratified random sampling, except instead of sorting based on category, we sort based on geographic area. So this happens a lot with national elections, things where there's a lot of space and people come from different areas. You might want to sort your population based on the state that they live in, the area that they grew up in, things like that, because that might affect your results, okay? So when you do a cluster random sample, first you do a geographic area sorting, so grouped based on geographic area or organization, and then you might do a simple random sample afterward. Okay, nearly there. Just 2 more methods, and this is a pretty short notes lesson, all things considered. The fourth one you're going to want to know is known as systemic random sampling. And systemic random sampling is pretty simple. It's better for larger groups of people, larger populations, as opposed to simple random sampling, for example. Now, all, of course, of the above, stratified and cluster, are also good for larger populations. But systemic random sampling is truly random. It's like simple random sampling that way. But it's a better version for large groups. Why? What you do is you pick every nth person or nth thing that you're studying, and you study that, right? You survey that, or you grab data from that. So that could be every 5th person walks out of a building and you survey them. That could be every 3rd. It could be every 20th. It all depends on how you decide to run your systemic random sample, right? But what this does is it completely eliminates bias from your experimenter. which is wonderful. We love to see it, right? Completely gets away from the idea of you randomly picking a person walking down the street and you having a bias toward the people you choose to interview versus the people you choose not to, because you have to interview every 5th or 20th person, whatever it is. All right, and now the final sampling method we'll look at is called multi-stage random sampling. And this is actually kind of a cheat because it's not a new kind of sampling. It's actually when you stack sampling methods. And what do I mean when I say this? Well, what I mean is, let's say you have a national survey that you want to give out, right? But the socioeconomic status of the people that are taking it matters. And you're also interested in understanding how gender applies, right? Well, then you would probably want to start with a cluster sample. And then you would want to move into a stratified random sample. And that would be considered a multi-stage random sample, right? You're doing a cluster followed by a stratified. This works with any two of the previous kinds of random sampling. You might do a cluster and then do a systemic. Same thing with stratified. You might do a stratified and then a systemic. It all varies. And it's all based on how you choose to argue. Now, these 5 types of sampling are going to be the ones that you're going to want to know for my quiz. The key here is to feel comfortable with what they do, why they do it, and to be able to accurately explain the ways in which sampling methods can eliminate or prevent bias. And I know you're going to do a spectacular job. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. And I will see you guys in class very soon. This is Mr. Mays signing off.